Okay, let's go over some of the words and ideas that we've been studying in biology for those students that are having difficulty with saying some of the more challenging vocabulary. So what is biology? Bios equals life from Greek, and ology means the study of. So biology means the study of life. The study of life. Okay, so these kind of things answer questions about, are you alive? What are the characteristics of life? What are you made up of? So what are some of the major branches of biology that we can study? Number one is botany. Botany is all about studying plants or plant biology. Another major one is zoology. And zoology is about studying animals. Some other ones on the side are cytology. And cytology is the study of cells. And genetics, the study of genes and DNA and inherited traits. Ecology is the study of habitats and where animals and plants live and how they interact with each other. So one of the first major things that we looked at was what makes something alive. And we studied this with our yeast lab, and we looked at yeast metabolism. Okay, what were some of the characteristics of living things? Okay, number one, they're made up of cells here on the side. Creatures that are made up of cells can be multicellular, multi meaning having multiple or many cells, like you and I are made up of many cells. A plant is made up of many cells. A dog is made up of many cells. They are multicellular. Or they can be unicellular, meaning they're made up of one cell. All things can reproduce. Living things can reproduce, meaning they can have offspring, they can have children, they can make copies or replicas of themselves. They can grow and develop through time. You start off as a baby, and you become a young child, and a teenager, and then an adult, and you become old. You go into senescence, and you get older. This is a big idea that we looked at with our yeast lab, that they can obtain and use material for energy. You need to eat in order to gain necessary molecules that you can convert into energy that your body can use. And we looked at this with the yeast. We gave the yeast sugar, and the yeast took the sugar and they used it for energy, and they produced carbon dioxide as a waste. This is another major topic. We'll look at this more in the second semester about maintaining a stable internal environment. So body temperature always stays the same. Blood glucose levels stay relatively the same. If things like your body temperature changes, or blood glucose changes, or blood pH levels change too much, this indicates an illness, and you need to seek medical attention. So this is one of the big words, big vocabulary words that you need to know. You need to know this. It will show up on a test. This word is called metabolism. 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 Using energy. This one about maintaining a stable environment, this is called homeostasis. Homeostasis. The word homo or homeo here is a Greek word meaning the same. The same. It's maintaining the same state all times. And the next one. Living things are based on a universal genetic code, meaning they have DNA, and DNA controls the expression of traits. Things change over time. And when we're talking about this, we don't necessarily mean that individuals change over time, although they do grow and develop. What we're talking about here is that populations of individuals grow and change over time. Groups of individuals grow and change over time. They're also responsive to their environment. So, for example, plants will tend to bend towards light sources. I shine a light in your eye will constrict, this kind of thing. Okay, change over time, big topic. We will talk about that more in AP biology, but it's about evolution, evolution, evolution. And based on a universal genetic code, we're talking about DNA. We'll talk about that more in AP biology when we talk about a concept called the modern synthesis. Okay, cells, we're going to talk about that later. Okay. So, our first chapter, we've looked at atoms. You should know how to draw a basic Bohr diagram of an atom. You should be able to talk about covalent and ionic bonding at this point. You should be able to locate and name atoms and get information from the periodic table at this point. If you cannot, I can make another video for you, or we can discuss it in class. But at this point, we're ready to move on to the major families of biological molecules. So we're looking at bio, meaning biology, and chemistry, biochemistry. Okay, we talked about the concept of organic chemistry. Organic chemistry, meaning that things are based on the element of carbon. Studies that contain carbon. And we talked about why is carbon so interesting? Why is it such an important molecule for life? Well, it all comes down to the fact that it has these 4 valence electrons. Valence, the electrons that are on the outside of the atom. They're the ones that do all the kind of chemical work. They're the ones that combine and bond with other atoms. And because it's got 4, it can form a variety of compounds with other atoms. And it allows for a lot of diversity in compounds. So here we just see very simple ones, right? They just form with carbon and hydrogen, single bonds. They can be very long, straight chains they can form. They can be branched chains. They can have double bonds or even triple bonds that they can form in long chains. And another interesting thing is that they can form these ring structures. And they can form ring structures with double or single bonds as well. Okay, so the fact that carbon has these 4 valence electrons allows for a lot of diversity in the kinds of compounds that it can make. Okay, we talked about this. So, so far in class, we've talked about atoms. When we talk about what we are made up of, what living things are made up of, we talked about atoms and the different elements that combine, forming covalent bonds that make things called compounds. Most of the compounds that are in our body are organic compounds. That means that they're formed from carbon. And they have different functional groups on them. We'll talk about functional groups a little bit later. But one of the big things that we're on right now is talking about the macromolecules. Right? Macro means big, a big molecule. And they come in 4 different classes. We've got the proteins, the lipids, the carbohydrates, and the nucleic acids. So when you eat your lunch or your breakfast or your supper, you're eating to get representative molecules that fit one of these 4. Okay? From there, we build up and we make the cell. So all these macromolecules come together and they form different areas of the cell. We've got the nucleus, the DNA, ribosomes, organelles. That will be a subject for our next unit. But for now, for Unit 1, right, we've got our atoms, compounds, macromolecules. For the rest of the semester, after we talk about this, we'll be talking about the cell, and that'll get us through the first semester. And then their second semester, we'll talk about tissues and organ systems and whole health of individuals. So we've got these 4 basic macromolecules, big molecules. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay? So your carbohydrates, kind of a fancy word about talking about different kinds of sugar. A lipid talks about different kinds of fats. Proteins, there's reasons why you eat your chicken and different things like that. Nucleic acids are the building blocks of your DNA and your genetic code. So the first thing we talked about were the carbohydrates. Okay? Your carbohydrates, as I said, are a fancy word basically for sugar. And they are the reasons why we eat fruit, vegetables, right? Our grains, they contain a lot of sugar in there. And sugar is the primary source of fuel or energy for the body. So there are 2 main functions for carbohydrates. They do 2 things for us. The first big thing that they do is they provide all the energy for living cells. Now, as we'll see, the lipids can provide some energy as well, but for the most part, we like to eat fruit because they're high in sugar, and our body knows that that will give us lots of energy that we can use. It's the main source of energy. The second thing they do is they provide structural components. So particularly in cell walls. Cell walls are found in plants. Carbohydrates are made up of a combination of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And they're always found in this 1:2:1 ratio. Okay, the actual word carbohydrate means kind of a watered. Hydrate comes from hydro, which means water, and carbo, which means carbon. So it's kind of watered carbon or carbon attached with water molecules. Okay, so another piece of vocabulary we need is talking about monomers. Mono means one, or it's a single building block of a macromolecule. So macromolecules are usually built up of either single pieces of monomers or many monomers put together. So we've got the word for many monomers put together is a polymer. Poly means many. So we can have many of these single units that repeat all stuck together to make these macromolecules, these big molecules. You have a monomer plus a monomer makes something called a polymer. Okay. So the first thing that we can look at is a monomer for a carbohydrate. And these are known as your simple sugars. And that some of the best examples are things like glucose and fructose. Glucose is what your plants make. And fructose is something that's found in fruits. One of the reasons why you like fruit. Apple juice, a very sweet thing. And ribose, which is a sugar that builds up your genetic material, found in RNA, and there's a modified version found in your DNA as well. So these are called mono, meaning one saccharides. So one sugar. So it's meaning it's one sugar monomer. Monosaccharide. Monosaccharide. One sugar unit. One monomer of sugar. A monosaccharide. Okay, as I said, glucose is something that plants make up during photosynthesis. This is the sugar that they make. We eat carbohydrates to get the sugar to power us, but plants, they can make their own sugar through sunlight, through the process of photosynthesis. Not here, but there's something called galactose, and it's something that's found in milk. It's a sugar carbohydrate found in milk. If you notice, a clue for whether or not you're dealing with a carbohydrate is if you look at the end, the suffix for each word, the end part of a word is called the suffix. You'll notice it ends in OSE. And that OSE, os, usually tells you that you're dealing with a carbohydrate, kind of sugar. You've got glucose, fructose, ribose. Okay, so we had monosaccharides. Those were one monomer. They were simple sugars because we only had one monomer. But we can start, of course, putting monomers together to make polymers. So our next kind is called a di meaning two, saccharide. Disaccharide, two sugars. And this is a complex sugar. Disaccharide, two sugar. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just taking those monomers of sugar and we're just attaching them, putting them together. And we did this in class with our models. We found it wasn't easy to put them together, but if we took out some pieces, we could fit them together. So if we take out, we've got two H's and an O, right? H2O. If we remove a molecule of water from the sugars, removing water is called hydrolysis. Lysis for meaning to cut, and to cut out a water, to remove a water, we can attach it by using oxygen as a bridge and put two sugars together, okay, through a hydrolysis reaction. Okay. So what molecule will this make? Of course, two H's and an O, that makes water, and when we take it out, it's called hydrolysis. When we add a water to something, it's called hydration, but hydrolysis, taking it out. So one of the best examples of a disaccharide is something that you eat probably every day. You can find it on your table. In the morning, you put it on your cereal, or you put it in your coffee or your tea, and that's sucrose. Right? Notice again, OSE for sugar. And it's just two monomers of sugar put together, two monomers, monosaccharides put together, two glucose molecules put together. Okay. Now, so we've got a monosaccharide, which is one sugar, that one sugar monomer, a disaccharide, which was two sugar molecules put together through a kind of hydrolysis reaction, where we take out water, but then we can put together many sugar molecules or sugar monomers all together, many monosaccharides all together into a polysaccharide, poly meaning many. So this is using the same kind of hydrolysis reaction to remove the water to piece together a long chain of sugars. Okay, and this is something very special. You find it in your body. It's called glycogen. Glycogen is a molecule of many glucoses stored together, and it's put and stored in your liver, and it helps you to store extra energy. We will briefly talk about cellular respiration later, and this is one of the steps. Any additional sugar to be used later for energy, your body will store it. We'll talk about respiration in more detail in AP chemistry, but yeah. So glycogen does function as a fuel store in animals. It's stored in the liver and in the muscle as well, and it's just to keep you topped up with enough kind of glucose for energy for your body in between meals. Okay. Another kind is starch, and Plants don't use glycogen, but they do store their sugar as starch that they can use. And the thing about starch is if you can stain it with iodine, which we'll look at later, and it makes it visible to see under the microscope. So each of these squares, right, are plant cells. And of course the plant cell wall, which covers the outside, is made up of a carbohydrate, but the kind of dark spots in the middle, that's all the starch. Okay, so where does the actual energy come from in a carbohydrate, right? These are just molecules of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen put together. Well, the energy is always stored in the chemical bonds. And your body breaks down the sugars to get the energy in there. Okay, as we said, that plant cell walls are made up of a carbohydrate as well. In this case, it's called cellulose. Cellulose, ose again, right? It's what builds up cell walls, and in plants, they're not found in animals. Polysaccharides. So some good examples of polysaccharides as a review are starch, found in plants, and they're used for energy storage. The best example of that are things like potatoes, right? They're very high in starch. Glycogen, which is found in the liver or the muscles of animals, and it's used for energy storage as well. And something like cellulose, that is the component for cell walls in plants. Okay. So this was just our review. So our review was carbohydrates, right, can be used as energy, or that they can be used for structural components. They're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen with a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Okay, we've got things like the monomer of it is something simple like a glucose molecule. Those are monosaccharides. We can put two monosaccharides together through a hydrolysis reaction to make a disaccharide. We can put many monosaccharides together to make a polysaccharide by using many hydrolysis reactions. And the best examples of polysaccharides are things like glycogen and starch that are used for energy storage. Okay, please study these words.